Yo guys, what's going on? It's Sam here. We're back on NCS Arcade. Another interview. As you can see, I'm back in my London setup now, and I'm joined by a legend of the NCS scene. SirensCeol is here with me. How's it going, bro?
That's good, man. How are you?
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Joining me all the way from Seattle. We just spoke about. So it's what's the time for you now?
It is 10:07 a.m. on the dot.
It's was it 6:07 p.m. for me, and we're still making it work. Still making it work. Of course, we're going to be speaking about Stay, the new release after your hiatus back onto the NCS screens and streaming services as well as just discussing a little bit about yourself. The fact that you have the oldest publicly available NCS track, which is a good thing we'll get into later, and a little bit more. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so I mentioned there in the intro about your return to NCS after, I think it's like 6 years. Is it 6 years?
Yeah, the last track I released on NCS was called Nostalgia, which was 2015.
Okay, right. So yeah, 6 years time. How does it feel to be back on NCS?
Dude, it's a little weird because, I never thought, when I stopped the SirensCeol project and rebranded into just Siren, I didn't have the intention of actually coming back. It wasn't like any sort of marketing thing or anything. It was just a genuine feeling that I wanted to move on into different things, but after I took like the last 4 years off of music in general. I just wasn't producing. I just needed a break from it, and this bug sort of just bit me, and was like, I just had this feeling like I had to go back. I was just trying way too hard to try all these different styles and everything, but in reality, like, electronic music is truly what I grew up on in terms of like my musical career. And so it just felt right coming back to it.
I mean, we're happy to have you back, and it's good that you're feeling like this is the right time to be here, which is awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. I was super stoked when you guys said, yeah, we love the track, we want to have it. It was just like, it was very motivating because after being gone for 6 years, you kind of have that feeling like, will anyone care? Like we all make music because it's fun and we do it for ourselves. But at the end of the day, you also want people to hear your stuff because you're putting this stuff out into the world so other people can have an emotional connection with it, so it's always nice to have that support from others.
So we spoke about you coming back, but I want to rewind time all the way back to when you actually first started out. How did you initially get into music production?
So I initially when I was young, I started playing the piano. We had a piano at my house, and my mom never let me play it because she was very protective of it. It was like a Yamaha Grand. It was nice and everything, but whenever she wasn't there, I would just go play it. And I noticed I was pretty decent at picking things out by ear. Like, I remember the first song I ever learned was the national anthem for the U.S., and I just kind of picked it out. But kind of fast forwarding from that point, that was sort of like my initiation into music. And then when I was a freshman in college, towards the end of my first year, one of my friends was really big into the EDM scene. I never really listened to it. I was still listening to like rock and rap and all that kind of stuff. But she really started to introduce me to it. I was kind of like reluctant to get into it at first because I had that like old head kind of mentality, like not so much like, oh, the straight to tape kind of people, but like I saw electronic music as button pushers, people who like click a button. Like, I was that ignorant about it, but I didn't realize what actually went into it. Funny now, I actually think it's more difficult in certain ways than recording live music, but I digress. So she got me really into the scene and everything, and then I started listening to deadmau5 because she was big into him, and it just started to grow on me. And then I remember one year, it was on my birthday actually, and I was like, I kind of want to get myself a present today. So I went down to Guitar Center, and I was just asked the dude, I was like, what do I need to get started in just making beats? He was like, oh, just get this keyboard, comes with Ableton, and then that was pretty much just it. I just got this M-Audio MIDI keyboard, and then it came with Ableton Intro, and then I didn't really choose Ableton. It was just chosen for me. But I'm glad it was because I love it, and the workflow is amazing.
Do you still use Ableton nowadays?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Never worked with... well, that's a lie. I've worked in Pro Tools and stuff for mixing purposes when I was doing back-end work in LA. But in terms of actual production, Ableton's all I've ever worked with.
Getting into a little bit about the hiatus that you mentioned earlier, Do you have any reasons that you decided to take a break from it? Was it you just weren't feeling it, and now you're back in the SirensCeol project? How has that all came about?
So initially, I stopped SirensCeol because I wanted to rebrand into Siren. I was just kind of burnt out on electronic music, and there was a lot of shifts in the industry as well. And I wanted to just sort of try simplifying things a little bit, perhaps maybe singing on my tracks and becoming more of a vocal artist and everything. But then I got into this weird headspace where I just felt like being as creative as possible. And so I don't know if you've ever heard it personally, but when I was Siren, I put out an album called Afterworld. And it was basically an 18-track album that was all orchestral stuff mixed with electronic stuff. I'm always going to be super proud of that album, but it was also pretty difficult to make because it's just a lot of detail work, especially when you're working with like virtual strings and stuff like that. To get them to sound real just requires a lot of attention to detail. So it was an exhausting album to make, but again, I'm sort of digressing. I rebranded into Siren, and then, you know, like, on more of a personal matter, back in like early 2016, I had a pretty tough run with my mental health, and it just got, I basically just lost enjoyment for everything I once liked, and because of that, it got kind of, I started to develop sort of like a weird relationship with music because I just didn't enjoy anything anymore. So it was almost like scary in a way because it's like, what's happening to me? I don't really know what's going on. So I sort of moved to LA to distract myself from all that, and I worked in the back end with like pop and hip hop artists and everything like that, producing their music. And I had a good time with that, but eventually I was just like, you know what, I need to step away completely for a few years to like really like sort out my life, figure out what's going on. That's when in like 2018 I moved to Washington, where I am now in Seattle, and you know, life has just been infinitely better since then. And I knew I always wanted to get back to music at some point, but I wanted it to feel natural and not forced or anything. So that's when like recently, like probably the beginning of this most recent summer, it just felt like, oh my God, I want to do this again. And so then I started sort of getting back into like producing for artists and everything, but eventually I was like, you know what, I miss being SirensCeol. I miss making electronic stuff. It's I see all my friends playing these shows again and everything, and it's like, it was just inspiring, and so the timing just felt right. Yeah, so super long story short, you know, I don't really want to get into all the details of it, but that was pretty much the journey back.
What advice would you give to any upcoming producers that are trying to get into the scene, trying to start?
My best advice would be like, figure out what platforms people are listening on. So when I was starting out, like, you know, being with NCS and everything, that getting onto YouTube promotional channels and everything back in like the 2012, 2013 era was sort of the route to go. Just getting in front of more ears, having that promotional support. I mean, that's always been a thing, you know, even before then it was, you know, getting on a record label and everything. But yeah, my best advice would be to find the platforms people are listening on. You know, nowadays Spotify playlists are huge, everything like that. But in addition to that, just being consistent, honestly. You know, like, I've struggled with it, like, you spend all this time, like, trying to perfect things, or you want to make different styles, and then you ultimately end up creating nothing because you're just being so critical on yourself, and you're so picky about what you actually want to put out that you end up just not doing anything at all. So just staying consistent, and, you know, they always say, like, art is never finished, only abandoned, and it's so true because it's never going to be perfect to you, but it might be perfect to someone else. And just having that consistency and making sure you're putting out your music to the right platforms and just keeping up with the trends in terms of where listeners are going is probably going to be the best route for growth. And if you are making good music, you are going to see growth. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to come if you just pretty much stay true to that path.
The hiatus has happened. There's been so many artists that have come and gone off the NCS page and in that time. Do trying to pick one if you can, who would be your dream NCS collab?
When it comes to NCS, one name that's always stood out to me is Tobu. Yeah, of the stuff I have heard on there, his has always impressed me.
Enough looking back, let's get into the future and the new release, Stay. Tell me a bit about that and the inspiration behind that track.
You know, there's not really like a lot of inspiration behind it, honestly. I have this VST called Arcade from Output, and they have some cool vocal packs. It's basically like a sampler VST. It just comes with a bunch of preloaded content and that you can manipulate. And there's a couple of cool vocal packs, and one of them was actually the main vocal from the song itself. It's just this little quick this phrase, I guess you would call it. And I liked it. And then the track itself started out as more of like a very big melodic sounding thing that I intended to put actual vocals on, more in the vein of Illenium. But then I found this little vocal phrase and I started to chop it up in sort of like a dotted note pattern in the song, and I really liked how it sounded, and so I started to morph it into what Stay became. I knew I wanted to make it emotional because just coming back from like a 6-year hiatus and everything I went through, it was just like an emotional journey, if you will. So I knew I wanted to sound like sad but also happy. So that, I guess you could say that's the main inspiration behind it, without getting too much into the process of creating it itself. But yeah, it all kind of stemmed from that little vocal piece, and I was like, oh, this sounds good with this chord progression, and it's happy/sad, and it just became what it was. But I also wanted to blend it sort of with that old school SirensCeol sound, which is a little bit glitchier, more of like, I guess, video game sounding sound design, for lack of a better explanation. Yeah, so it's sort of just, that's how it became what it was.
And the track is out now, so the link will be the first link in the description if you guys haven't streamed it yet, which you should be. So go and stream that. There's been a couple of live shows that you've done over the years. If you could pinpoint one that has been your favourite that you've done, what would it be?
Hands down, the first EDC that I did. I was playing at that time. I had won the Discovery Project, which is, it's their competition for like up and coming DJs and producers to get a chance to play on their Discovery stage. It's the smallest one there. Like, it was like in the middle of the food court, but it doesn't matter because honestly, like, I've played bigger shows and I've also played smaller ones, and I always prefer the smaller ones. Even when I go to shows myself, I always prefer the smaller venues because it's a lot more intimate. The turnout was pretty good. Like, and I even saw like a lot of my friends from like high school turn out to come to it, and so like it was just like this gateway into like, wow, this is actually happening. Like, I'm on stage at, you know, even if it's the smallest one, I'm on stage at one of the biggest festivals in the US. It's just an experience that not many people get to have, and I don't say that in a bragging way at all. It's more so just like the appreciation of the moment. When you're on stage in that kind of moment, you just sort of like forget about everything else. It's like playing your favorite video game, but times 100.
So for any of you that have only been following us for the past few years, or have just been keeping up with our recent releases, which is awesome, or haven't had a look back into the old catalogue, SirensCeol, your first release on NCS, Coming Home, is actually now the oldest publicly available video on the main No Copyright Sounds YouTube channel. 12 million views 8 years ago. If anyone was around at that point and remembers that track dropping on YouTube, shout out to you, because you're a veteran of the scene.
That's OG status for sure.
It really is, yeah. What I actually did is I quickly went through the comments earlier on and tried to find just a few of my favourites that I could pick out. So what I would like, if we can do this, is you to just react to these comments, just give you a general consensus, and then just tell us a little bit about the impact that track had on you and your musical journey. Soulstar commented, and this was only a month ago, so shout out to you, Soulstar, commented, the oldest public NCS song is still one of the best things I've ever heard.
The funny part is, listening back to it, I'm like, oh man, I hate this production. It's so messy. It's like, the frequencies hurt my ears now. Like, I would never put that out today. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because people say things like that, and I'm like, okay, well, you liked it. So that's ultimately what's truly important, is like, I liked it at the time, and people 8 years later still are like, oh, that's still one of the best things out there.
So there's another comment from DNGB who said that This is one of the first EDM songs that I heard, and it inspired me to be a producer.
See, like, just hearing that, like, gave me a little bit of chills, because, like, that's the same kind of feeling I was talking about being on stage. It's like, if you can impact people's lives to that degree with what you create, like, that's what it's truly all about.
I mean, that track 8 years ago, I'm sure that there is plenty, I mean, more than plenty, a load of people that are looking to release and get onto the electronic scene, and any labels there that growing up listening to that track, which is just crazy. I'm really interested in this one. Could you explain your name, where that comes from?
To clear things up, it's pronounced SirensCeol. I've heard SirensCeol, I've heard SirensCeol, and I don't blame people. It's a weird word, and like, I wouldn't know how to pronounce it either. But basically, the first part, sirens, it's obviously the mythological creature, the sirens, who would draw people in with their sounds, their music, anything like that, sort of like in a meditative state, usually with like sailors, and they would draw them into like sharp rocks and everything. The second half, CEOL, that's it's the Gaelic word for music, or song, whichever translation you're using. I don't know the true pronunciation of it. I believe it's Ceol, said with obviously a much thicker Irish accent. Yeah, so all put together, it just means sirens music.
Okay, final question. Now, people that have been watching this series will know exactly what's coming now, because it's my usual round-off one. But if you were to describe your music in one word, what would it be and why? In
SirensCeol music, like, I've always used more like futuristic sounding stuff, glitchy stuff, and so when I think of that, I think of like something that's like more eclectic in nature, and like just seeing like lights at a show or something. It sounds electronic, so I guess neon would be a good way to describe that.
Brilliant. That's awesome. That's a great choice of words. I love asking that question. It always like ponders thought for people. I think it's a tough one, but it really gets you to think. It really does. All right, and we are about there. That's 10 questions down.
Wow.
With the legend himself. So thank you so much for joining me, bro. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Awesome. If you guys want to listen to the new track Stay, that'll be in the link below, as well as SirensCeol's socials, NCS Arcade. We mentioned it a few weeks ago, but our Instagram is all up and running for a whole load of memes and that kind of stuff. Go and check that out. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much, bro. Peace.